Welcome to all who are here. Um, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Michael Bowe. I have my co-host, Dr. Roland Hill, with us as we begin this very important podcast called Convicted Faith. We talk with real people, we tell real stories, and we try to help with real change. And right now I'm doing the talking, but why don't we begin with who we are? We're two pastors,
Two different pastors.
two vastly different pastors. Uh, my brother is a Seventh-day Adventist pastor, and I'm a pastor in the mainline tradition, a PCUSA church. Well, let's talk about how we met. What sparked this partnership?
It's interesting, Dr. Bowe, Brother Michael, that we met at the Greater Huntsville Interdenominational Ministerial Fellowship. I was making a presentation on economics or evangelism, whatever. I can't even remember what it was, but you
It was
enjoyed it.
mission and evangelism.
Oh, that's what, okay, all right, all right. And so, you came up afterwards, introduced yourself, and it's just like our chemistry just met, you know. And then somehow you found out that I was involved in prison ministry. You called me and we began to have conversations and said, now we need to find a way to share the stories of people who have had difficult life's experiences, but have found changes in their life. So that's how we met.
Yeah, I agree. I remember that mission uh, conference, and I remember like when we were having some people talk, some people when they mentioned how to address some of the challenges in the church, um, it popped up in my mind. Well, they've obviously never served as a pastor.
Okay.
You
Yeah,
know,
that's true. Hmm.
but and you and I got to talk a little bit about that, and then yes, I found out that you do uh, prison ministry stuff, and I told you that I wrote also a book about that because um, I come from a well, my background is I'm a returning citizen. Uh,
Well, that surprised me too, because you didn't look like one, you didn't talk like one, and you're a pastor.
right, I'm the exception to the rule. Most of the time. Uh, Most of the time, people don't get to uh, regain entrance into society and things, and that's a long journey, and we'll talk about that in one of these podcasts coming up. But I came up with the name Convicted Faith, and uh, what does that evoke to you personally? And let's talk about our title of our podcast here.
Well, when I saw the title, I liked it because what happens, people actually operate from their convictions, whether it's right or wrong, they operate from their conviction. And conviction lets us know what we believe, and how we live out that belief. Now, the faith part, it tells what we believe in. Right? Some believe in whatever their faith is. But believers like us, we believe in, of course, what God has to say in His Word about the life of Christ and how it influences and changes life. So it became meaningful to me because as I've dealt on the front line of ministry, I've seen how people who fall in love with Christ, their lives are changed, their faith is acted out in their life.
So how long have you done ministry? How many years? I'm not gonna
Well,
date you, but I want to just
well, I don't mind being dated because the other way is not good. All right.
okay.
I've been in ministry over 50 years.
Okay.
I pastored 14 different churches for 33 years, and I was a professor training pastors for about 8 years. I've done a lot of work with returning citizens and also what I call Godpreneurs, entrepreneurs.
Mhm.
So I've been in ministry about 50 years and I've seen a lot, heard a lot. And so when you talk about convicted faith, brother, I've seen people live out convicted faith. People
Yeah.
who have experienced life not at the best end, but when they found Christ, they lived it out to the good end.
So for me, I picked this one because a common phrase that citizens who have broken the law, they're
Okay.
called convicts.
Ah, okay.
They are convicted. They are
Hmm.
convicted felons. They are convicted
Hmm.
criminals. They are convicted. So it's a
Right.
little play on words,
I like it. I like it. Hmm.
because um, as we'll talk about, prison ministry, what a lot of people think about it is just helping people get saved, help them escape going to hell at some point, because obviously they've broken the law, so they must be the scum of the earth and
Hmm.
all that stuff. And so part of it, I wanted to tell the stories of convicted people who have real faith that is beyond just salvific faith. And it has those same um, convictions that you just spoke about. Um, so that's part of what I have felt about it, and I think we will be able to interchange these two definitions pretty well together.
No, I like the way you phrased it, Michael, because it's when you see a convicted felon and you see him make the transformation, you see both convicted, you pay the penalty, but then when you find your true north, you see that same conviction, man. And what I've experienced returning citizens, when they find their true north, they're the most convicted people about doing right and helping others.
Right. Absolutely. Well, we come from very different backgrounds. I mean, I'm a former Baptist turned mainline liberal PCUSA pastor. I mean, uh, we we have different backgrounds and different. You come from the old school of doing 50 years of ministry. I've just done about 15, so I'm getting going.
Mhm.
Um, what have you learned and enjoyed from our friendship so far that shaped our faith journey together?
Well, the one thing that I have appreciated, Dr. Michael Bowe, is the vulnerability that you have. You know, sometimes we pastors put up the mask and we like to portray that we've come from a long line of good people and we've never had any problems. But you don't have any problem letting people know that, I'm a human being, have had some difficult times in life, but I found transformation. And, I'm very vulnerable. I'm not trying to be anybody else. And so when I tell stories, when I preach, I share from the vulnerability that I'm just like everybody else. Now, I've been fortunate because I grew up in a preacher's home. I've lived a great life. Went to private school all my life. I tell people I'm not rich, but I sure lived like I was rich, going to private schools all my life. Um, but what I found was when you walk with God, all right, it makes you sympathetic and empathetic to the hearts of people. So when I met you and I could see and feel your heart, a genuine heart for people, any people, in fact, I asked you, where were you from? And when you told me you were from Alabama, I'll be honest, I was shocked, sir.
Yeah,
Because
I'm aware of the background.
so, your
We're in the history
genuineness
books for all the wrong reasons.
for all the wrong reasons. And yet, I saw a kindred and a bonding that I think is quite needed today. Plus, one of the things that I appreciate about you, Dr. Bowe, one of the struggles right now with the generations that are here is this struggle with what I call intergenerational conversations. Um, it's just not happening. And so the idea that we can have this kind of podcast and we can talk from our experience. You're young. Actually, you're younger than my children, brother. You're young, all right? And then from my long history of being in the ministry, being married, having children, and being in life, and working across not only denominational lines, but racial lines. My experience has exposed me to enough people of all ethnic groups where I think we have a lot to say for a generation and for a world that needs this type of intergenerational and interdenominational and interracial conversation.
Yeah, and that's part of what I have really enjoyed as well. I've got to experience um, a side of ministry and an experience of ministry that um, I only knew from the outside in a sense. And I've gotten, and I appreciate the vulnerability you just spoke about. And I think that's part of what has drawn us together. You've been able to speak very clearly and very articulate about your own struggles within the pastoral ministry and churches that gave you headaches and all, and but also your successes and the
Right.
things that have gone well. So we're going to talk about stories, and we're going to talk about one really messy story, um, the one in your book. We have this great book here, the Righteous Redneck's Journey to Love. I guess first off, why this title? I mean, it's catchy, but it is very theological. What drew the title?
To be honest, Michael, it wasn't theological more than it was experiential. I had actually had that title about 20 years or more earlier. And I was writing a novel about a couple that was a member. You don't even know this. It's going to be brand new to you. They were members of my church in Fayetteville, Tennessee. All right. And it was a white couple. They were the only white couple in our church. Okay. This black church in this little Tennessee town. And the husband was a true believer. This brother was loved all over town. He was loved by, in those days in the community, it was just black and white. He was loved by the black and white community like a brother, like a true Christian. On the other hand, his wife, who was a retired teacher, was actually a racist, coming to my church every week to the point where she would never call me by my name. I'm a pastor. She's a member of my church. And she would pass me every week, not speak, just brush by, but brother, I won't call their names because some people may know them. But the good brother, he would come by and hug me, and I knew he was genuinely loved. I would go by because I'm a true pastor. I would go by their home to visit them, and the wife would meet me at the door, and she would say, "My husband is in the back. Go see him." And she would leave, never come back again. She taught the children in our Sabbath school, what you would call Sunday school, and she would call the little black kids pickaninnies. Yes, she was a true racist, brother. And so, but you know what? My membership were true Christians. They were true lovers of people. So they didn't allow her obvious struggle to take away from her gift of teaching. And she did an excellent job of teaching the Bible. And it's interesting, she was teaching Bible lessons, but it hadn't gotten in her heart. So what was amazing about this story was that her husband fell ill, and this little church took care of him until the day he died. And so I was going to write a novel. And by the way, he was bedridden for 1 year before he died. And the members would come over and give her a rest, allow her to go out. On Saturdays, they would go by and pick her up, and one of the brothers of the church would stay by so that she could have a good Sabbath rest. During that time, God literally converted her. Mike, when I would go to the home, It was amazing, the change and transformation. She would meet me at the door and she would say, "Hello, Pastor, so good to see you." I'm about to drop dead, man. This is transformation.
Right.
She loved being around us. And that's when I saw the title, The Righteous Redneck's Journey to Love, having no idea that I would use it as a true title for a real story.
Well, you didn't. Obviously, this book is not written about yourself. Um, you wrote it on behalf of someone else, and you wrote it in the first person. That's probably a talent that it's very interesting how you did all this. So, can you tell about that relationship and what responsibility did you carry um, telling someone else's story, giving them their voice?
Well, first of all, I've had a long history of writing, and I had written a book about my own sister-in-law, and it was in Who Has Disabilities. And one of the things I felt inspired to do is allow her to speak rather than me speak for her. So I've written a book on her life. So when this opportunity came to write Keith's life, I thought it was critical for people to hear him, see him, and feel him. And you can't do that if you're writing in the third person. You have to write in the first person so that the reader can really see the true story about the true person so that they will understand that this is a real person. And to be honest, it is a gift that God has given me. So I can't take credit for it. It's a gift that God has given me to be able to plummet into the lives of people, literally experiencing what they experience as I hear the story and then as I write the story.
Yeah, I'll tell you, as I read it, I was immediately drawn in. There are stories of his struggles with racism and his upbringing, um, being all of those things. Like I felt it, like I was there watching a sitcom almost, seeing
Mhm.
what was all happening, and also screaming at the book, no, all kinds of with all kinds of choices and things. Um, Keith, whose story this is about, it's written in here, so I'm not telling someone else's story. He lives with dyslexia. So how did that shape your writing process, and what does that say about who gets to tell these stories, especially in the church and in faith communities and so on?
Well, again, I'm a pastor by calling, training, and experience. So when I heard his story, I felt his pain. I felt his life story. And when a person has dyslexia, if it's not attended to, that means they end up not being able to read and then not be able to write. And I think sometimes in our world, in our communities, we don't see these types of experiences and persons as legitimate human beings,
Hmm.
right? So when he told me about his dyslexia and the majority of his life not able to read and write, it took me back to the story that I wrote about my sister-in-law, and the title of the book is The Secrets Behind the Wall. She lived with this secret of not able to read or to read well all of her life, and it literally exploded her mind. Okay. So now I'm recounting what I wrote about my sister-in-law some 20 years ago, and I'm listening to Keith's story, and I'm now again feeling what it must be like to not be able to read. And I'm thinking about, and again, I try to get into the experience of the person. How would it be if you're riding down the street and you can't read the street sign? Those are the kinds of things that touch my heart. And, illiteracy is still quite rampant in our country,
Oh, yeah.
but no one talks about it.
That's right.
And so it was critical for me to allow the story to tell what it really means to have dyslexia, the inability to not see the words on the page. They're flashing up and down in your mind, and you really can't put them together.
Yeah, they're
Okay.
scrambled up.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, I had to dig myself to understand what dyslexia really is and to see that and then admire the way Keith, the hero of the story, determined to live in spite of it. So, what you were, and I'm glad that you said that, Michael, I write intentionally for the person to experience the story, not just read the story. When I wrote my sister's book some years, sister-in-law's book, that is, some years ago, a medical doctor called me, and her son had disabilities, mental disabilities, learning disabilities in particular. And she had done a master's in special education. And after she read the book, she called me. I didn't know this lady from anybody. She called me and she said, well, Dr. Hill, I want to thank you. This is the first time I've ever read the story of someone who has learning disabilities where they are speaking themselves. And I think that's critical because everybody tells their story, but they're not allowed to tell their own story. So that's what I sought to do in the Righteous Redneck's Journey to Love. I wanted people to know this is Keith's voice, not Roland Hill's voice, that this is his experience. This is not a created novel, but a real life spirit experience that not just Keith goes through, but millions of people go through.
Yeah, and I, so I'm going to lean into my pastoral intuition here a little
Yes,
bit. I know when you engage in a story like this and when you engage in a writing like this, God is involved in this process. I mean, when we
correct.
write sermons, typically, at least for me, I'm sure I think it would be the same. The sermon is usually for me first.
Yes,
You know, I experience whatever I'm trying to teach to others, where God's like, well, you're the first student of this
right,
particular
right.
lesson. So, how did writing someone else's journey and hearing someone else's story and how God worked through their life, how did it affect your own spiritual growth and understanding of love and redemption on the other side of racism, where you're on the other side of that end of that spectrum?
That's an interesting question, Michael. It required me to do some deep reflection on my own experience, having grown up in the segregated South and experiencing segregation firsthand, and sometimes at not the nice ways.
Oh, that's what I mean. You're on
Right.
the other end.
I heard you. I heard you. Um, First of all, it allowed me to see how God, in His mercy, allows not just me, but Black people to give grace to a society that does not even care often. And in fact, I wrote a series of articles called Black Grace. And it's an explanation of how grace helps many in the Black community to deal with the horrors of segregation and racism. And so writing his story gave credence to what God had given me in understanding another aspect of grace that Black people have learned to live with. Secondly, it gave me an understanding of how white people really live. I've never lived in the kind of community that Keith lived in. Okay. And we paint the picture in America often that it's the Black people that have real struggles, but the white people don't. And the truth of the matter is people are people. And poor people are poor people, no matter where they are. So as I'm writing his story, I'm saying, wow, they have a tough time. And while the media doesn't cover it, white people are having a struggle in this country, but nobody wants to really say it. In fact, we don't even mention it. We only highlight the middle class and all of that when there's a large poor class in our country. And so reading his story, I begin to see and empathize with white people because I see that their journey in life, while they have more access and more privilege, doesn't make their life less painful. And in some instance, more painful. Writing Keith's story, I understood how hate for one group of people backlashes on the very people who hate. In writing the book, I got a chance to understand the community that Keith and many white people grew up in and how they're caught in a culture of degradation, hopelessness, and oftentimes there is not a lot of way out.
Yeah, there's
Go ahead.
sociological studies that talk
Okay.
about some of the struggles that um, that professional athletes have some cases that grew up in poor neighborhoods and then they're given bazillions of dollars and they don't know how to handle not that not so much they don't know how to handle the social shift
That's correct, sir.
makes. And that's part of what in the story, Keith's story, at the very onset, and I'm giving away some of the book, so all listeners should read the book.
Mhm.
But his dad threw him into racism, and he felt something funny about it. He didn't agree with it automatically, and he felt something funny when he was brought to a Klan meeting. He didn't care. He was scared to death at the meeting, and but some people are not. Some people, that's just you listen to what dad said or mom said, and that's just what you were taught to do.
Wait, hold it. That was convicted faith.
That's it. Exactly.
That was what they came to believe,
That's
and they
right.
had a
And
deep conviction of it.
that was their worldview.
Right.
And how do you change someone's worldview, especially in a time when society was all for it? That was the thing. And it's these kinds of the raw, gritty moments that you talk about in the books. I mean, there are some touchy subjects from racism, a lot of addictions. There's sex, drugs, and rock and roll. There's
That's
everything.
correct. It was everything in the story.
So how
And
did you?
by the way, that's why I knew it was a good story. It covered the whole gamut of human experience. There was
So,
nothing left out of Keith's life that everybody can identify with because it's universal. Go ahead.
well, I was just going to say, how did you decide about how honest you were going to be when telling someone else's story? You know,
Well,
um,
first of all, my commitment is what the person wants to tell. So my question to Keith as I was preparing to tell the story, how much do you want to tell? And he gave me permission to tell it all. So now my responsibility is to write a book that tells the truth, but doesn't try to bash or make people into anything worse than what they are. So that was one of the dilemmas because when I started reading, actually interviewing and talking to Keith about his story, because he can't write. Now I got to write everything. Okay. I'm just doing interviews and writing as I'm doing the interviews, riding around Huntsville, because that's where the story took place, looking at the things and hearing the story. I had to decide whether I would spend the time on the hate that's in the story, and it's strong. It's hate, as you've read. It's strong. I had to decide whether that was the theme of the story, because hate sells movies, sells stories,
yes.
fear and all of that stuff sells. So I had to decide what was really the redeeming virtue of the story. Now let's go back to the Klan meeting that his father took him to when he was 8 years old. As a pastor and a theologian, I'm asking the question, what was it that protected him? You grew up in this environment, this is all you see. And so then I saw what I consider a love cover that covered his heart, that kept him from becoming hateful, that seeing hate rubbed against a young boy who knew nothing but hate. Because he didn't grow up in church. He didn't have a Bible to read. He didn't have nobody to tell him about love. So that was the unconditional, penetrating love of God working. So it helped me to shape the story around what God was doing, not so much what Keith was doing.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that part, and you really touched on kind of the next thing that, I mean, this is a story about transformation,
Yes.
and there had to be something, again, God working in his life, even when he didn't know anything about God working in his life, from protecting him at a Klan meeting to all kinds of other things. And it did. It brought him from racism to grace, and from uh, he also got to work out relationships that he wasn't all that sure about. And you brought up some of that, where you've been on the bad end of some of that. So how did this story connect with your own pastoral journey?
Remember, now, I grew up in a pastor's home. Okay. And I grew up in the segregated South. So you sort through what you experience and what you've seen. And I remember watching my father navigate the racism of the 50s and the 60s, which was not good at all. Okay. Right. I saw his quiet commitment to stand for justice, but yet at the same time, he didn't go out shouting out people. There were white Adventist churches in our community that wanted black people to come sing. Because we can sing. Everybody, did you know every black person can sing? Did you know that?
Apparently.
So we had a good choir at church. In fact, my father was pastoring probably the largest, in fact, it was the largest black Adventist church in the community. It was just one, but it was like 400 or 500 members. So it was a nice sized church, brand new facility, by the way. Okay. And so they would invite us over to sing, and you could not go through the front door into the sanctuary. You went through the side door, went into the choir stand, singing, you went back out. That's how it was. And my father would graciously do that without making a big stink about it. Yet at the same time, he made sure that his children understood their identity as children of God, African Americans, who were filled with pride and understanding of where they came from without shouting it out to us. Now, fast forward. So that gave me an ability to be able to navigate this story of Keith's, because now I see how grace allowed my father and my forefathers to navigate the racism in America. And I'm watching how God is allowing him to navigate his own journey to love.
So God was working in your life before you even knew it as well.
That's correct, sir. That's the power of grace.
That is. So that this grace, it's a clear theme of breaking free from shame and judgment. And why do you think that message is so urgent today in our church, in our world? I mean, how does this story speak to people who do feel disqualified and voiceless?
Well, I'm going to take the side of the story because he's telling his own story. Okay. And one of the things that Keith said to me, he said, Roland, I want you to let the world know that God can take anybody and change their life. And I'm an example of it. And it's when you read the book, I tell him, and we talk regularly, I say, Keith, it's a wonder that you are alive.
That's
And he
true.
said, yeah. And he says, Roland, is nothing but the grace of God. Nothing. I know that God preserved your life. I'm not confused about how I am alive today. And so in writing his story, you see grace in such, well, I'll use my term. It's black grace because people who are oppressed, people who are on the downside, people on the outside, they don't see a forensic grace. A forensic grace talks about you're you're covered with righteousness, you're forgiven of your sin. No, black grace says, not only am I forgiven of my sins and declared righteous, but I'm being transformed by the grace of God. I have the fullness of Christ in me that's bringing about the transformation. And Keith's story is empirical evidence that that's true because he didn't know what was happening.
Right? He was just along for the journey.
You know, I like to talk about Black grace like I don't know if you remember the Alka-Seltzer commercial. You too young to know the
Well, I
Alka-Seltzer.
don't know. Well, you got to describe a little more.
Okay. You know, there was a commercial about Alka-Seltzer. It's a pill that helps with digestion
Right.
when
So
you
I remember
overeat.
the cup being dropped
That's
in a
it.
cup, and
That's it. Yeah. So you drop the two tablets in, and the song goes, "Fizz, fizz." Oh, now I forgot it. Oh,
I know
what a
what fizz
relief
you're
it
talking. I
is.
know
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
jingle.
So when God drops grace in us, when we allow Him to drop grace in us, flop, flop. Fizz, fizz. Oh, what a relief it is. When grace drops into a person, transformation begins because grace is not just a badge and a covering. It is the active agent of God in transforming one's life. So as I'm writing Keith's story, I'm seeing grace alive. I'm seeing it. I'm seeing this thing that he can't explain, that I really can't explain as I'm writing. I'm seeing grace literally transforming the life. And Keith is intentional when he even tells his story. He said, this is what God has done for me. I had nothing to do with it. If it were up to me, I would be dead. By the way, every one of the young fellas that grew up with him in the community that they grew up are dead, and they died horrible deaths. And it showed me the horrible end of hate. And you asked me a question, why is it so important now? Because I see communities dying from hate. They're fighting to get something that in the end is destroying them. And that I'm a pastor. I love people. Okay. So that hurts me when I see people who God loves destroying themselves because they don't want to get rid of the hate about a person's skin or because they've immigrated to this country. It only backlashes on them. And so I think it's the message is truly important for this time. In fact, when I wrote the book, when it came out in 2020, both Keith and I knew that it was God's timing for the book because it's a book that tells the story of why we need to love each other. And by the way, at the end of the book, Keith makes this statement. He says, I want to tell this story, and this is what's exciting about the book that's not being told in this time by either blacks or whites.
So you talk about the end of the story. It's not a neat conclusion.
No, it's not, sir. It's not.
It's
It's
a
not over.
journey.
It's a journey. But this is what he
And
says.
why
He
why
said,
is that important to portray authentically? I mean,
"Well, we like the happy ever
happy
after
endings.
stories." In fact, now that you say that, my sister-in-law's book didn't end well. Okay, her mental illness didn't change. She learned how to manage it better, but she has to be on medication for the rest of her
I mean,
life.
he's still dyslexic, and
That's correct.
he
He
still
still
has
has struggles.
struggles and other things,
Yes, yes,
baggage from his past that he
that's
has to
correct.
deal.
And God doesn't change our circumstances, He changes our responses to the circumstances. And Keith's response has been just magnificent. He says, and in fact, he says, I am a redneck, but I'm a righteous redneck. He doesn't try to move away because some people, they want to run away from their history. Let me get out of here. I don't want anybody to know that I grew up in this type of environment, that my father was this, my mother was that. I don't want anybody to know that. I want to start over fresh where nobody knows my name, not knowing that it's Cheers where everybody knows your name.
Right.
Mhm.
Well, what is your hope that how people, when they read this story and when they get to engage and hear this, how do you think, how would you hope people respond to the Righteous Redneck's journey to love?
First of all, I want them to feel it like you did. So often people get books and they read them for good information. I want people to really take the journey with Keith. And then secondly, I want them to identify with him, right? I want them to know that this, he, people like him are real people, like we say, the title of our show is real people. He's a real person living a real life with real challenges, but you can be victorious. Third, I want them to see themselves in the book. It's a mirror, you know. And we've had literally hundreds that have given reviews, and they all say, they tell Keith, when I read your story, I see myself and I see where I need to do some changing. That's what I'm hoping. And then fourth, I want people to share the story with others. I think the book has redemptive qualities. I think God will use it for the transfer, and Keith wants that too. He wants the book to circulate widely to answer, coming back to what you said, to answer the need for a world who's dying to see love and its transformative power. And this book helps persons to see it. Let me say this last thing. He says, I'm having my story written because so often this story of a white man who is a righteous red knight is never told. And there are millions of us out here who the media never sees. And I want the world to know that there are a bunch of us here.
Yeah, I agree. The stories of rednecks are usually not told in the way that you've told it. It's told in the opposite, where they like to
Right.
portray the hate. And I think, and in some aspects of this, he didn't feel like God could ever redeem him for some of the things he did. He was kind of stuck in a very rigid theology that really and truly, I mean, he didn't know where it came from. He didn't grow up in a church or anything. He just had this view that God was one certain way.
Hmm.
And so, what do you say to people who do feel stuck in such a rigid theology, but they're longing for something deeper and more grace-filled?
I've thought about that through the years. And the first thing I say to people, if you really want to break the worldview that has shaped your life, you got to start with the Bible. You really do. I can't get away from that because really it's been the Word of God that has allowed me to have a broader worldview and see people as all creatures of God, loved by God. So a few days ago, I was reminded again of John 3:16. And it says, "For God so loved the world." It didn't say religion. It didn't say an ethnic group. It didn't say a nationality. It didn't say a country. It said, God so loved the world. So that means everybody is loved by God. And that's where we all must get to, that because we are sons and daughters of God, we may not be doing right. In fact, some of us ain't doing right. Okay, we live in a world. But God says, just because you're doing wrong doesn't stop my love. All right. And I think that's critical. And this book really shows it that, and you're right, Keith didn't know what was happening to him. And the theology that came through the society, because he didn't go to church, was God can't love you because you've done such bad. And he did some stuff that wasn't good.
That's
All
right.
right. And he found out that God didn't make his final judgment on him based on the bad deeds that he did. He makes his judgment on his willingness to accept the God, the Savior that covered all that. But now let me make it clear, because this is Keith's story. Keith would tell you. Now you can't keep doing wrong and expect blessings.
Right.
And so he's committed himself to honoring God in his life, and that allowed the transformation to come.
Yeah, I was going to ask if he were sitting here today, what do you think he would want people to hear? But I think you've answered that one, and we're going to have him on this podcast. We already talked about that.
Yes, yes.
Well, friends, this is an incredible book. Dr. Roland Hill is the author of several books. How many books have you written?
At the moment, about 35 books.
35 books. In the process of writing a much larger one. We'll talk about that another time. But for the moment, The Righteous Redneck, The Journey to Love, which is the story of Keith B. Coffin, which is an ordinary guy going through ordinary stuff. And all of us have our stuff. There will be a link in the show notes and a way to purchase this book directly. It's just an incredible story. It's worth your read. We hope that you have enjoyed coming together for us as we begin this journey of convicted faith. There's many other great stories that we're going to be talking to, people having second chance citizens, to people doing prison ministry stuff and various things. We're going to have a lot of fun time together. Do you have any closing words for us, Dr. Hill?
Well, Dr. Bo, I'm just so proud of you. I'm looking forward to us discussing your story, sir.
Oh, yeah, that's
I think
coming
it'll
up.
be interesting. Yeah. And I think you're right. This program, we're praying and believing that it will have a profound impact on the viewers as we anticipate being the good light in the world that's needed.
Well, blessings to you as we go. We'll see you next week.